The Hero's Journey of Freemasonry. Audio version Part 2. By Jeff Morgan. Copyright. The Hero's Journey of Freemasonry, 2025. Jeff Morgan, all rights reserved. This work is a personal exploration of Freemasonry's symbolic and esoteric dimensions. It is not an official publication of, nor endorsed by, any Grand Lodge, Masonic jurisdiction, or recognized Masonic authority. The views expressed are solely those of the author. Chapter 1. The Entered Apprentice. The Candidate as the Seeker of Light. The Call to the Quest. The journey of the entered apprentice begins in darkness, an absence of physical and spiritual illumination. This darkness is not merely the absence of light, but a profound symbol of the unawakened soul. It signifies ignorance, potential, and the initiate's readiness to seek enlightenment through experience, discipline, and reflection. As Albert Pike writes, darkness is the womb of being. Through it, the soul finds its way to the light. The term neophyte, derived from the Greek neophytos, meaning newly planted, is a fitting metaphor for the first stage of Masonic initiation. This concept reflects the archetypal hero's journey described by Joseph Campbell, in which the hero is called to adventure, departs from the familiar world, and enters a realm of trials and transformation. The entered apprentice mirrors this universal narrative, beginning his path in darkness and emerging into the symbolic light of Masonry. The blindfolded candidate, a symbol of the unawakened soul. The use of the blindfold, or hoodwink, is a defining feature of the entered apprentice's initiation. It signifies ignorance, dependency, and the initiate's reliance on his guide to navigate the unknown. W.L. Wilmshurst writes, "The hoodwink is the darkness that veils the soul before illumination. Only through trust and humility can the veil be lifted." This symbolism has deep roots in ancient philosophy and esoteric traditions. In the Republic, Plato's allegory of the cave describes prisoners who perceive only shadows, mistaking them for reality until they are guided into the light of true understanding. Similarly, the entered apprentice, guided by the senior deacon, is brought from symbolic darkness to Masonic light, representing his transition from ignorance to knowledge. In the Gnostic tradition, the material world is often depicted as a veil concealing divine truth. As Elaine Pagels explains, gnosis is the lifting of the veil, the recognition that the soul, trapped in the illusion of the material world, belongs to the divine. The removal of the blindfold in Masonic initiation is a moment of revelation, signaling the candidate's first step toward enlightenment. Additionally, the blindfold represents humility and the necessity of guidance. In many ancient traditions, initiates relied on mentors to lead them through sacred rites. Carl Jung describes this as a descent into the unconscious, where the ego must surrender control to encounter the deeper self. In the lodge, the worshipful master and senior deacon serve as guides, symbolizing the importance of mentorship on the path to self-discovery. The threshold crossing, entering the lodge as a transformative act. Initiation, in all traditions, marks a transition from one state of being to another. Crossing the threshold into the Masonic lodge is a sacred moment that divides the profane from the sacred. According to Mircea Eliade, initiation is a rite of passage, a journey through symbolic death and rebirth that leads the individual from the mundane to the sacred. This threshold crossing reflects a universal pattern in the world's mystery traditions. In the Egyptian mysteries, initiates of Osiris and Isis passed through darkened temples and endured trials before receiving divine wisdom. Similarly, the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece involved rites of symbolic death and rebirth, culminating in the revelation of sacred truths. Christianity also preserves this pattern through baptism, where the individual symbolically dies to their old self and is reborn into a life of spiritual truth. In Masonry, crossing the threshold into the lodge is the candidate's symbolic death to the profane world and rebirth into the sacred mysteries of the craft. From a psychological perspective, Carl Jung identifies initiation as a descent into the unconscious, where the individual confronts hidden aspects of the self. This process, known as individuation, is essential for achieving inner wholeness. Similarly, the entered apprentice's journey through the degrees of Masonry represents stages of self-discovery and transformation. The lodge as the soul's first reflection. The Masonic lodge is more than a building. It is a symbolic representation of the cosmos, the human soul, and the journey toward enlightenment. Every element within the lodge reflects aspects of the initiate's inner self and spiritual path. As W.L. Wilmshurst writes, "The lodge is the soul's reflection, a sacred space where the initiate confronts the mysteries of his own being. The lodge's alignment from east to west is significant, as it mirrors the path of the sun and symbolizes the soul's journey from ignorance, west, to enlightenment, east. Plato, in Timaeus, describes the cosmos as a harmonious structure ordered by divine intelligence. Similarly, the lodge, constructed on principles of sacred geometry, reflects the divine order of the universe. Vitruvius, the Roman architect, stated that all sacred architecture should embody the principles of harmony, proportion, and cosmic order. Furnishings of the lodge as elements of the soul's journey. Every object in the lodge has symbolic meaning, guiding the initiate through stages of spiritual transformation. The two pillars, Jachin and Boaz, these pillars, placed at the western entrance, symbolize duality, strength and stability, severity and mercy. Albert Pike interprets them as representing the balance between material and spiritual forces. They mark the boundary between the outer world and the sacred space within. The altar, positioned at the center of the lodge, the altar symbolizes the heart, the seat of divine truth. Manly P. Hall notes, the altar is where the finite meets the infinite, the point of contact between man and the divine. Upon it rests the volume of the sacred law, representing eternal wisdom. The brazen star above the altar. This star represents divine illumination, guiding the initiate toward enlightenment, much like the star that guided the Magi in Christian tradition. The all-seeing eye, located in the east, the all-seeing eye symbolizes the omnipresent consciousness of the divine. In Hermetic teachings, it represents the universal mind that observes and orders all creation. Reflections, the journey has begun. The entered apprentice degree is more than a rite of passage. It is the first step in the hero's journey of spiritual transformation. By stepping into the lodge, the initiate has accepted the call to seek enlightenment, crossing the threshold from ignorance to knowledge, entered symbolic darkness, acknowledging the limits of his current understanding, encountered the lodge as a reflection of his soul, a sacred space that will guide his inner development. As the initiate progresses, he will ascend the winding staircase to the middle chamber, where he will begin to comprehend the nature of consciousness, the lost word, and his place in the great work of spiritual evolution. Freemasonry is, in essence, the hero's journey of the soul. With this first step into the unknown, the entered apprentice has embarked on the eternal path toward light, wisdom, and self-mastery. The symbols of awakening. Temple is the soul. The journey of the entered apprentice begins in darkness, but as the initiate moves forward, the symbols within the lodge serve as keys to his awakening. Freemasonry is a system of allegory, where every tool, ritual, and architectural element carries a deeper meaning. These symbols are not arbitrary. They belong to a long tradition of sacred knowledge, carefully preserved in the lodge as a reflection of both the universe and the human soul. Carl Jung, in his studies of the collective unconscious, observed that throughout history, cultures have independently developed common symbols and archetypes that express universal spiritual truths. In Freemasonry, the lodge itself is an archetype, an eternal symbol of the initiate's spiritual journey. Its structure, furnishings, and orientation serve as a blueprint of the soul, guiding the seeker toward enlightenment. The lodge is not just a meeting place. It is a microcosm of the initiate's own spiritual reality, a sacred temple where the soul undergoes transformation. The lodge as the soul. In Masonic teachings, the lodge represents more than a physical space. It is a sacred reflection of the inner temple of the soul. Across history, mystery traditions have viewed the human soul as a temple built through discipline, wisdom, and self-purification. Freemasonry preserves this truth through the allegory of Solomon's Temple, understood not merely as a historical edifice, but as a symbol of the perfected self. The concept of the soul as a temple is deeply rooted in both Western and Eastern esoteric traditions. According to Schwaller de Lubic's, ancient Egyptian temples were cosmic models reflecting divine order, their structures aligned with celestial principles and embodying sacred geometry. Similarly, Solomon's Temple, as described in the Hebrew Bible, was built according to divine specifications, symbolizing both cosmic and moral harmony. Christian mystics continued this tradition, teaching that the human body and soul were the true temples of the divine presence. Augustine of Hippo wrote, "You have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." The Masonic Lodge as a reflection of Solomon's Temple. In Freemasonry, the lodge becomes the symbolic temple, where the initiate undergoes spiritual construction. just as Solomon's temple was built with wisdom, strength, and beauty. The entered apprentice must use the symbolic tools of the craft to shape his inner temple into a place worthy of divine light. The lodge's design reflects this concept in multiple ways. The east represents enlightenment, the rising sun and the source of wisdom, where the worshipful master presides. The west symbolizes the initiate's past state of ignorance, from which he has emerged. The center represents the balance between material and spiritual realms, where the altar, the heart of the lodge and the soul, is placed. The two great pillars, Jachin and Boaz, stand at the entrance, marking the threshold between the material world and the world of wisdom. As Manly P. Hall observes, the twin pillars are symbols of the great gates through which the soul must pass in search of enlightenment, just as they stood at the entrance to the mysteries in the temples of Egypt and Greece. These pillars echo the pillars of Hercules in Greek mythology, which represented the limits of the known world and the gateway to divine mysteries. Through Masonic rituals, the initiate symbolically constructs his inner temple, refining himself through moral discipline, self-awareness, and enlightenment. This reflects an esoteric truth found in alchemical and mystical traditions, that the true temple is built within. Jung's collective unconscious and the lodge as an archetype. The lodge is an archetype of the collective unconscious. Carl Jung, a pioneering figure in modern psychology, proposed the concept of the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of human experience, symbols, and archetypes transcending individual cultures. According to Jung, humanity independently develops similar myths, symbols, and spiritual frameworks because they emerge from universal structures within the human psyche. The Masonic Lodge, with its symbols, rituals, and sacred geometry, functions as one such archetype. It embodies a universal pattern, appearing in various forms across different traditions. Just as every culture has a creation myth, a sacred space for initiation, and symbols of transformation, Freemasonry presents a system of symbols that align with the universal journey of the soul. The Lodge is the archetype of the hero's journey. Jung's theories align closely with Joseph Campbell's concept of the hero's journey, a narrative pattern found in myths and religious traditions worldwide. This journey involves a departure from the ordinary world, trials and initiations, a descent into the unknown, and eventual enlightenment. The structure of the Masonic Lodge and the degrees of initiation correspond to this universal pattern. 1. The profane world. The world of the uninitiated, the candidate, before initiation, represents the individual in a state of ignorance, blind to the deeper truths of existence. 2. Crossing the threshold. The blindfolded candidate is led into the lodge, symbolizing his departure from the mundane world into the sacred space of transformation. 3. The ordeal and inner trials. Through ritual, symbolism, and experience, the initiate undergoes tests of knowledge, character, and self-reflection, drawing him closer to enlightenment. 4. The return with the light. The candidate is brought to Masonic light, representing his first step toward understanding the mysteries of life and the soul. Campbell notes, the hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are encountered, and a decisive victory is won. Archetypal symbols within the lodge. Jung identified several key archetypes that appear in mythology, religion, and psychology. These archetypes are also present in Masonic symbolism, reinforcing that Freemasonry taps into universal spiritual truths. The wise mentor. The worshipful master in mythology, the hero is often guided by a wise figure, such as Merlin, Gandalf, or Thoth, representing wisdom and guidance. In the lodge, the worshipful master plays this role, leading the initiate through his journey and illuminating the path to self-mastery. The twin pillars, duality and balance across traditions. Twin pillars, or dual forces, represent the balance between opposing forces. Examples include yin and yang in Taoism, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge in the Kabbalah, and the jed and with scepters in Egyptian symbology. As Mircea Eliade writes, the two pillars symbolize cosmic dualities, light and darkness, order and chaos, whose resolution brings the initiate to higher knowledge. The sacred center, the altar as the soul's core. In every culture, a sacred space exists where transformation occurs: the Christian altar, the Hindu mandala, or the Egyptian Benben stone. In Freemasonry, the altar represents this sacred center, the place of reflection, oaths, and enlightenment. René Guénon observes, "The center, marked by the altar, is the axis of the world, the point where heaven and earth meet." Reflections, the lodge as the universal temple. Freemasonry's symbols and structure are not random inventions, but part of a universal system of spiritual transformation. The lodge is both a reflection of the cosmos and a blueprint for the soul's awakening. Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious suggests that these symbols exist beyond time and culture, appearing repeatedly in different traditions because they express deep psychological and spiritual truths. For the entered apprentice, the lodge is not just a place of ritual, but a sacred space where the soul constructs itself, stone by stone, toward the ideal of Solomon's temple, the perfected self. As the initiate progresses, these symbols will continue to unfold, revealing ever deeper layers of wisdom and guiding him on his hero's journey toward enlightenment. The soul, consciousness, and the mind of God. Man is a temple. Freemasonry teaches that man is a temple and that within him resides the divine spark, a reflection of the great architect of the universe. The Masonic journey is not merely an intellectual pursuit, nor is it simply a fraternal tradition. It is, at its core, a spiritual path that seeks to awaken the initiate to the true nature of the soul, the reality of consciousness, and its connection to the universal mind, often referred to as the mind of God. Throughout history, mystery traditions, esoteric schools, and religious teachings have sought to answer the profound questions of human existence. What is the soul? What is consciousness? What is our place in the divine order? This chapter explores the nature of the soul as the eternal seat of consciousness, the concept of the mind of God as the source of all knowledge, and how Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious aligns with Masonic teachings on universal wisdom. The soul is real, the eternal seat of consciousness. One of the greatest philosophical debates throughout human history has centered on the nature of the soul. Is it real, or is it merely an illusion? Modern materialism asserts that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, a byproduct of neurochemistry and electrical impulses. However, ancient wisdom, mystical traditions, and esoteric teachings, including Freemasonry, affirm that the soul is not an abstraction but the very essence of our existence. The soul is understood as the bridge between the finite and the infinite, linking our mortal, physical selves to the boundless, eternal reality of spirit. In Masonic symbolism, the rough ashlar represents the unrefined soul, which must undergo a process of transmutation and perfection before becoming the perfect ashlar, the fully awakened, enlightened being. This mirrors the great work of alchemy, which sought to turn base matter, the unawakened soul, into gold, the perfected spirit. The soul in ancient wisdom traditions. Plato, in Phaedrus, described the soul as pre-existent and immortal, temporarily inhabiting the body before returning to the divine realm. The soul through all eternity moves in a cycle, never perishing, always seeking to return to the world of forms. The Hermetic tradition, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, teaches that the divine spark within man can be reunited with the higher realms of consciousness through spiritual practice. Man is a mortal God, and the universe is the eternal body of the immortal mind. The soul in Freemasonry's initiatory path. Freemasonry preserves this same teaching through its three-degree structure, which symbolizes the stages of the soul's journey toward enlightenment. Entered apprentice represents the soul in its dormant state, unaware of its true potential. Fellowcraft symbolizes the awakening process, where the initiate begins to understand the hidden wisdom of the universe. Master Mason enacts the death and resurrection of the soul, aligning with the esoteric principle that one must symbolically die to the material world before achieving true spiritual illumination. The soul, then, is not merely a belief but a reality, a divine seed of consciousness that connects the initiate to universal intelligence. Consciousness as the mind of God. The nature of consciousness is one of the greatest mysteries of human existence. Modern science views consciousness as a function of the brain, but mystical traditions, metaphysics, and Freemasonry suggest a radically different view. Consciousness is not an individual phenomenon, but a fragment of a greater, universal intelligence. The mind of God is the eternal source of all knowledge. What we perceive as our individual consciousness is merely a limited perspective of this infinite whole. The mind of God in mystical traditions. The concept of the mind of God appears in nearly every mystical and religious tradition. Hermeticism, known as nous, the divine mind from which all things emerge. Hinduism, called Brahman, the ultimate, formless reality that permeates everything. Christian mysticism, identified as the Logos, the divine intelligence through which the universe is ordered. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Freemasonry expresses this concept through its reverence for the grand architect of the universe, symbolizing not only a creator, but an infinite intelligence governing all existence. The universal nature of consciousness. Esoteric teachings assert that our individual minds are fragments of a larger, collective intelligence. The goal of spiritual initiation is to expand one's awareness beyond the limitations of individual perception and to reunite with the greater whole. In the Fellowcraft degree, the journey up the winding staircase symbolizes this expansion of consciousness. As the initiate ascends, he progresses from personal awareness to universal enlightenment. The arrival at the middle chamber represents the threshold of divine knowledge, a realization that the initiate is not separate from the grand architect, but a part of its infinite mind. Jung's collective unconscious and the soul's connection to universal wisdom. Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious offers a powerful psychological framework for understanding the soul's connection to universal wisdom. Jung proposed that humanity shares a deep, subconscious reservoir of symbols, archetypes, and myths inherited from ancient times and embedded in the psyche. This concept aligns with Masonic tradition, which preserves symbols that have appeared in mystical teachings, religious scriptures, and initiatory rites for millennia. The square and compass, the pillars of the temple, and the all-seeing eye are not arbitrary inventions, but manifestations of timeless archetypes that reflect fundamental truths about existence. Archetypal symbols in Freemasonry. Jung observed that humans independently develop symbols of transformation and enlightenment because they arise from the deeper structures of the psyche. Examples include the wise mentor, the worshipful master in mythology. The hero is guided by a wise figure, such as Merlin, Gandalf, or Thoth, who imparts knowledge. In Freemasonry, the worshipful master leads the initiate through his journey. The twin pillars, Jachin and Boaz, symbolizing duality and balance. They echo ancient archetypes such as Yin and Yang, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge, and the Jed and with scepters of Egypt. The sacred center, the altar representing the soul's core and the axis of spiritual transformation. The Masonic altar aligns with similar symbols such as the Christian altar, the Hindu mandala, and the Egyptian Bimbin stone. Jung, Campbell, and the universal hero's journey. Jung's theories are closely related to Joseph Campbell's concept of the hero's journey, a universal pattern found in myths and religious traditions worldwide. Campbell outlines the hero's path as a sequence of stages, all of which appear in Masonic initiation. 1. The call to adventure. The initiate is drawn to seek knowledge, represented by his entrance into the lodge. 2. Crossing the threshold. Blindfolded, he enters the sacred space of transformation, leaving the mundane world behind. 3. The ordeal. The ritual trials, lectures, and obligations symbolize the hero's inner struggle. 4. The return with the elixir. Enlightened, the initiate becomes a master mason, embodying the universal wisdom he has attained. Campbell writes, the journey of the hero is the journey of every soul through life, from ignorance to knowledge, from darkness to light. Reflections, the soul's journey back to the divine mind. Freemasonry affirms that the soul is real, consciousness is universal, and the mind of God is the source of all wisdom. The initiatic path is a process of reclaiming one's true identity, moving beyond the illusion of separation and recognizing the eternal unity between the self and the divine. Through the hero's journey of initiation, the Mason learns that he is not a passive observer in the universe, but a participant in the great work, the ongoing process of divine creation and self-perfection. The Masonic Lodge, with its symbols and rituals, serves as a sacred space where this realization unfolds. The Lodge, the mystery temples, and the dark castle, the soul's reflections. The inner world of the seeker. Throughout history, sacred spaces have served as reflections of the inner world of the seeker, designed not merely for worship, but for transformation. The Masonic Lodge, ancient mystery temples, and the mythological dark castle all symbolize different aspects of the soul's journey, revealing that the external structures used for initiation are representations of the internal experience of awakening. Freemasonry, like the mystery schools of antiquity, preserves a sacred space where the initiate undergoes inner transformation. The lodge, with its careful design and use of symbolism, is not just a meeting place. It is a microcosm of the initiate's own soul. Likewise, mystery temples of the past reflected the cosmic and psychological journey of the seeker, guiding them through trials, purification, and enlightenment. However, before the initiate can fully realize his divine potential, he must first descend into the darkness of the unknown, much like the mythic hero who enters the dark castle, the prison of the lost soul, in search of the light hidden within. This chapter explores these three reflections of the soul: the lodge as the initiate's sacred temple, the mystery schools as ancient maps of spiritual transformation, and the dark castle as the shadowy depths of the self where enlightenment is earned. The Masonic Lodge as a representation of the soul. The Masonic Lodge is more than a physical structure. It is a sacred reflection of the initiate's soul, a space where inner transformation takes place. Every symbol, tool, and ritual within the lodge corresponds to an aspect of spiritual development, making it a microcosm of the greater journey of enlightenment. In esoteric traditions, the soul is often described as a temple under construction, one that the seeker must build and perfect over time. This concept is central to Freemasonry, expressed through the allegory of Solomon's Temple. The initiate begins as a rough ashlar, an unshaped stone, and must use the working tools of Masonry, the square, compass, plumb, and level, to refine himself into a perfect ashlar, a symbol of spiritual completion. The lodge itself functions as a symbolic blueprint for the soul. Orientation from west to east symbolizes the journey from ignorance, west, to enlightenment, east, mirroring the path of the rising sun. The altar at the center represents the heart of the soul, where the divine spark resides. It is the axis mundi, the point where heaven and earth meet. The twin pillars, Jachin and Boaz, act as guardians of wisdom and strength, marking the threshold between the material world and higher understanding. In the Masonic journey, the initiate undergoes symbolic death and rebirth, progressing through degrees that mirror the path of the soul toward enlightenment. Just as Solomon's temple was built with wisdom, strength, and beauty, the Mason builds his inner temple with knowledge, virtue, and self-mastery. Mystery temples and the journey of the soul. Long before Freemasonry, the great mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and Rome provided initiates with sacred spaces designed to guide the soul through transformation. These temples were not merely places of worship, but carefully constructed environments that reflected the soul's inner path of initiation. The Egyptian mysteries, sacred maps of the soul. In Egyptian mystery schools, such as those at the Temple of Karnak and the underground halls of Osiris at Abydos, the architecture reflected cosmic order and the journey through the afterlife. The initiate passed through a series of chambers, each representing stages of purification and trials, before reaching the innermost sanctuary, where divine revelation occurred. These temples symbolized the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, where the soul encountered trials before emerging into the light of Osiris, the god of resurrection and eternal life. The Eleusinian mysteries, death, rebirth, and the vision of eternity. In Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries offered initiates a vision of the immortality of the soul. Participants were guided through a series of symbolic trials representing the descent of Persephone into the underworld and her return to the light. This myth taught that through death and rebirth, the soul could achieve eternal life. The Chamber of Reflection, a link between ancient mysteries and Freemasonry. A direct connection between ancient mysteries and Freemasonry is found in the Chamber of Reflection, a small, enclosed space where the candidate is placed before initiation. Confronted with symbols of mortality, such as a skull, scythe, and hourglass, and phrases like Vietir well, Visita interroraturi, rectificando invenis occultum lapidem, visit the interior of the earth, and by rectification, you will find the hidden stone. The initiate faces his own mortality and prepares for inner purification. This practice echoes Hermetic and alchemical traditions, which emphasize solitude, meditation, and inner purification before enlightenment could be attained. The function of mystery temples, including the Masonic Lodge, is to guide the initiate through a process of self-reflection, symbolic trials, and inner work, ultimately leading to spiritual rebirth. Yet, before reaching the light of knowledge, the initiate must first descend into the darkness within himself, a descent symbolized in myth by the journey into the Dark Castle. The Dark Castle, the the soul's descent into shadow. In mythology, the dark castle represents the soul's imprisonment in illusion, ignorance, and fear. It is the fortress of the unawakened mind, a place of entrapment where the seeker must confront the obstacles preventing him from attaining enlightenment. This archetype appears across cultures and spiritual traditions. Arthurian legend, the Grail Castle, once a place of divine power, becomes a dark, ruined fortress shrouded in mystery. Only the worthy knight, who asks the right question, can restore the castle and recover the Holy Grail, a symbol of divine wisdom. Dante's Inferno. Dante, guided by Virgil, descends through the darkened depths of hell. Only after confronting sin, darkness, and despair can he ascend toward the light of paradise. Alchemical Nigredo. In alchemical traditions, the Nigredo stage is the black phase, a state of death, decay, and inner turmoil. This stage must be endured before the soul can be purified and transformed, leading to spiritual rebirth. The Dark Castle in Masonic allegory, the death and resurrection of Hiram Abiff. Freemasonry mirrors this concept through the Master Mason degree, in which the initiate undergoes a symbolic death and resurrection. The allegory centers on Hiram Abiff, the architect of Solomon's temple, whose death represents the loss of divine wisdom. The raising of Hiram by the Master's grip signifies the restoration of that lost light within the initiate. Hiram's descent into the darkness of the grave and his subsequent raising symbolize the initiate's confrontation with the dark castle of his own soul. The journey is one of self-overcoming. Through death to ego and illusion, the true self emerges, resurrected in light and understanding. Reflections: the lodge, the temple, and the castle as mirrors of the soul. Freemasonry, ancient mystery temples, and mythological fortresses all serve as reflections of the soul's journey. Each represents a different aspect of the initiate's transformation. The Masonic Lodge, the sacred space where the soul constructs itself, progressing from rough ashlar to perfect ashlar through the tools of moral and spiritual discipline. The mystery temples of Egypt and Greece, physical and symbolic maps of transformation, guiding the initiate through trials, symbolic death, and rebirth. The Dark Castle, the inner realm of shadow and illusion, where the soul confronts ignorance, fear, and ego before emerging into the light of self-mastery. These structures, whether physical or symbolic, reveal that the journey of initiation is universal. The path of the Mason is the same as that of the ancient initiate, the mythic hero, and the alchemical seeker. The initiate must navigate the darkness of the unknown, confront the trials of self-discovery, and ultimately emerge as a master of the mysteries. The Lodge, then, is not just a building but a map of the soul, a reflection of the eternal journey toward enlightenment.